Welcome back, focus learners. Okay, today on the Explainer, we're unpacking a concept that absolutely blurs the line between pure math, computer science, and honestly, the very fabric of reality itself. Usually we just think of math as a tape measure, right? It's a descriptive tool we use to figure out the dimensions of the physical world. But what if the numbers were actually building the house? What if, instead of just measuring reality, mathematical logic was actively generating it? Today, we are going to break down this mind-bending mathematical structure called the God Formula Quine, and we'll look at exactly how a theoretical universe might literally compute itself. So let's dive right into our central mystery box question for today. Can a universe compute itself? I know, it sounds like a premise from some sci-fi novel where we're all living inside a simulation, but mathematicians and computer scientists are actually approaching this with rigorous formal logic. Generally, we just assume that a universe needs a creator or a big bang or, some massive external physical force to set the rules and start the clock. But what if an equation could actually host its own computation? Like, what if existence isn't a physical place that just happens to obey mathematical laws, but instead, existence is literally the active execution of a self-sustaining mathematical formula? To really grasp this, we first need to define a super fascinating concept from computer science called a quine. Now, a quine is a highly unique computer program that takes absolutely zero input, but it produces a perfect, character-for-character copy of its own source code as its only output. Think of the ancient symbol of the Ouroboros, right? The snake eating its own tail. It's a closed, perfectly self-sustaining loop of logic. It doesn't need external data. It doesn't need a user to type anything in. It simply runs, and by running, it creates itself. It's basically a mathematical entity that entirely justifies its own existence. And just to prove this isn't only philosophical musing, we can look at actual, verified lean-force source code straight from the Gnosis topological programming language theorem ledger. So this isn't just theory or some abstract thought experiment being debated in a faculty lounge somewhere. No, it is a fully compiled, zero-axiom mathematical proof. The math has been thoroughly tested, the code has been executed, and the theorem totally stands up to the absolute strictest standards of modern computational logic. It's a rigorous, proven framework for a self-generating system. And right at the very heart of that compiled ledger is this exact line of code. We call it the God formula. So it goes W equals R minus the minimum of V and R plus 1. Honestly, it looks deceptively simple, doesn't it? Just a few letters and basic arithmetic. But this specific, tiny little string of characters is the exact engine we're going to be deconstructing today to see how reality might actually bootstrap itself. This right here is the seed from which an entire logical universe can spontaneously emerge without any outside interference whatsoever. Okay, let's walk progressively through these variables so the dense syntax is completely digestible before we hit the real deep dive. So W stands for weight, which is our final output state. R is the budget, and that represents the available resources in the system at any given moment. V is rejection, meaning the consumed budget, or basically what's already been spent or processed. And finally, you have that plus 1 at the end. That is the clinomen. Now, in ancient Epicurean philosophy, a clinomen was this unpredictable swerve of atoms, like a totally uncaused movement. Here, in our formula, it represents an irreducible structural unit. It's this unavoidable spark of action that literally forces the system to move and completely prevents it from just staying static. Section 1. The deep dive, dissecting the quine proof. Let's get right into it. Any Turing-complete system can theoretically simulate itself. Here, our four-state program simulates the God formula using only the most absolute basic Minsky primitives. Now, a Minsky register machine is literally one of the simplest, most stripped-down theoretical computers imaginable. It relies entirely on just 3 operations: incrementing a number, decrementing a number, or halting entirely. That's it. No complex processors, no advanced memory banks. Just those 3 primitive operations. And with only those basic tools, the self-computation happens in 3 really simple steps. First, we set our counters to hold our current budget R and our rejection V. Second, we enter a highly specific subtraction loop. And third, we add that clinomen. Well, what's really fascinating here is exactly how step 2 functions. The subtract min loop methodically strips away both the budget and the rejections simultaneously. Let's actually use a real concrete numerical example to see this in action. Imagine your budget R is 5 and your rejection V is 3. The machine looks at these two numbers, finds whichever value is smaller, in this case obviously the 3, and then subtracts that exact minimum from both counters. So your budget of 5 drops down to 2, and your rejection of 3 drops perfectly to 0. It beautifully and systematically reduces any state down to its most basic, stripped-down ground state, effectively clearing the board using nothing but primitive mechanical subtraction. Which brings us to step 3. Once the system is stripped all the way down to that absolute baseline, the Kleineman is added. By simply executing an increment command, literally adding a 1 to that stripped-down counter, the system does something miraculous. It mathematically yields the exact output state, the weight, of our original formula. By mechanically processing those primitive steps, it returns the equation itself. With absolutely no outside data, no user inputs, and no external memory banks, the machine has run a process that flawlessly outputs its own defining equation. It is, for all intents and purposes, mathematically self-aware. The code runs a machine and the machine builds the code. I actually want to pause here just a second to let the profound awe of this code as poetry really sink in. The Lean 4 source ledger notes, the formula computes itself. The universe describes itself. Self-hosting is not a metaphor. It is a theorem. When computer scientists and logicians realize that self-creation can be formally, mathematically proven, it kind of shifts our entire understanding of reality. It means that the universe doesn't necessarily need a builder if the blueprint itself contains the instructions and the energy to construct the building. Section 2. Bootstrapping the universe ex nihilo. So let's shift over to the cosmological resolution of our explainer. I want you to really try and imagine applying this exact mathematical Ouroboros to a completely empty universe, creating something out of absolute nothingness, or ex nihilo. Both your budget R and your rejection V are set to absolutely 0. There are no resources, there's no consumed budget, there's no matter, no time, no space. Literally nothing. We're asking the equation to evaluate a complete absolute void. When the God formula looks into true nothingness, what happens? Like, what does it actually output? The absolutely crucial point here is the answer is 1. This is the climax of the fixed point theorem. From a 0 budget and 0 rejection, the Kleineman, that unavoidable structural swerve, produces a tiny sliver of existence. It proves mathematically that you cannot actually have absolute nothingness. The void is naturally unstable. Because the formula, even when embedded in the ultimate void, will always calculate that +1. It will always output a 1. Existence itself is fundamentally irreducible. The universe basically cannot help but exist. And this brilliantly illustrates the chain reaction that happens next. If we apply the God formula to its own output iteratively, it creates an infinite deterministic trajectory. Level 0 gives us a 1. Well, that 1 now becomes the budget for level 1, which processes the math and outputs a 2. That 2 then becomes the budget for level 2, outputting a 3. Iterating this self-hosting Quine formally bootstraps what mathematicians call piano arithmetic, which are just the fundamental axioms and rules that define the entire set of natural numbers. Out of an absolute void, this single looping equation spontaneously generates 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to infinity. It literally builds the foundational building blocks of all mathematics, all physics, and potentially all reality, out of literal nothingness. Which brings us to our final thought today, and it's honestly a massive question to chew on. If a single self-hosting mathematical formula can essentially bootstrap existence, generating the infinite sequence of natural numbers from a completely empty universe, what else is hiding in the deepest fabric of formal logic? If existence is just an unavoidable mathematical swerve, maybe things like consciousness, gravity, and time are just further iterations of the loop, right? Just waiting to be computed. It's an incredibly paradigm-shifting thought. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this structured dive helped illuminate a truly mind-bending concept for you. Keep exploring, keep questioning the baseline rules of reality, and I'll catch you on the next one.